I think it's time to get started. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. My name is Jeff Best, and I will be your host for today. Secretly, silently on the side is my colleague, Sebastian Meunier, who will be monitoring the questions panel, which is a big deal. Because when we were first talking about hosting this webinar, I had said no questions. I don't want questions from anybody. And my colleague said, but you have to have questions. This is really cool stuff. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. This is my webinar, and I don't want questions. And I was told, but this isn't your webinar, Jeff. You work for Intuiface. It's actually Intuiface's webinar, and somebody else could do the webinar. And I said, we should have Q&A. We should. So here's how it's going to work. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen in the GoToWebinar toolbar, you will see a questions panel. In that questions panel, you can type your questions, and my colleague, Sebastian Meunier, will take a look at those questions, and we'll answer them on the fly. Actually, maybe I do need my headpiece in case Seb needs to talk. So he's going to answer your questions whenever you type them in. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause once about halfway through and see if there's any big questions we're not going to get to later in the presentation. There's a lot of stuff today that we're going to cover. And you might have some questions we're going to answer later. And if that's the case, I'm not going to answer them right away. We're going to wait until I answer them. But if there's a big question about halfway through and Seb thinks we're not going to cover it, I'll answer that on the fly. But please do not be shy about typing in those questions. And we will, at the end, when it's all over, take more questions. Okay, so hopefully everybody understands how to interact, and I would like to get started. I hope you like to get started. So let me set the stage for you a little bit. We had a big announcement about Intuiface and third-party CMSs, so let me set the stage, okay? Interactivity is increasingly recognized as a critical value add for traditional digital signage. We've been broadcasting information for decades. The ability for an audience in any venue to interact with that media is relative to traditional digital signage, a more novel means of communication. This ability to touch, speak to, gesture, what have you, with digital content. This graphic you see here, we actually created this digital interactivity landscape with the help of Invitus out of Europe, to identify all of the vendors addressing the various ways one can interact with digital content in a venue. I don't mean on a screen with a mouse. I mean, I'm standing in a room. How can I interact with that content on the screen? We created this digital interactivity landscape. We update it about once a year as companies unfortunately go and sometimes arrive on the scene. So there's lots of areas that are being addressed through technology to facilitate interaction with the digital content. And more often, customers, clients, companies want to incorporate this in their venues. The reality is that traditional digital signage, a medium that's been around forever, that's not what they were born to do. That's not what they were meant to do. And so they don't typically address this type of interactivity. That is not a complete list of vendors, by the way, on the right. I understand that. There's way more vendors than that. If you don't see yourself, it's not a personal thing. It's just a list to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Most of you should know. So anything beyond, a simple touch or simple sensor triggering, it's not in the scope of, it's not their fault on the right. As they said in Good Will Hunting, it's not their fault, right? This is what Intuiface does. This is what makes Intuiface unique. It was not originally born for traditional digital signage. It's not what it was for. It was for interactive digital content. In fact, when you go back to the very early days of Intuiface, it wasn't about signage at all. It was about kiosks. It was about those installations in the physical place, which wasn't a sign because you didn't touch a sign. Now, if you touch it, can you not touch it? Is it a sign? Is it a kiosk? It's a meaningless distinction. So Intuiface was born with a concern for interactivity. That's what it was all about, to make it really easy for companies to create interactive digital content without writing any code. So that landscape of digital interactivity is core to our value proposition. The goal was to merge the two, to be somehow to bring our value to the marketplace, to bring the two worlds together. We're friends, not enemies. We're not even frenemies, probably. I never really know what frenemy means. I mean, I know what it means, but we developed a technology that can enable us to bring the two worlds together. And we call that Player NextGen. Player NextGen is the core of our ability to take our interactive digital content and somehow merge it with, embed it in the traditional signage networks deployed all over the planet. Player NextGen is a next generation version of our player runtime. We've had a player runtime forever. We have rebuilt it using modern web technologies. It's the next generation of our runtime. This runtime runs on the devices with which that we support natively. When we run locally on a device, forget the web. If we're just running locally on the device in player, we get a significant performance boost across all platforms that we support for local execution, in venue, on device execution, not the web. Big performance boost for us. It maximizes our resource utilization. It means we can start running on platforms like Raspberry Pi. And because it is built on modern web technologies, it should be able to scale and adapt to all the evolutions coming in the marketplace. So selfishly, Player NextGen did a lot for us here, but it also enabled us to go to the web. Because it's entirely based on web technologies, it's enabled us to go to the web. The same experience you're building in Intuiface to run on the Windows device can now run in a web browser across multiple operating systems, thanks to Player NextGen. It can run as a website on a dedicated web page. It can run embedded inside an iframe. It can run as a progressive web app. All of this thanks to Player NextGen. Okay. Well, if Player NextGen enables experiences to run on the web, and if most digital signage CMSs accept web HTML5 content as a widget, an object, an asset, whatever you guys call it, then it seems like a web deployed Intuiface experience should run embedded in a digital signage CMS. All of this seems to be the case. All of this is implied. And the answer is no. We can't. No, of course the answer is yes. That's the point. Yes, it can. Okay, so let's talk about that. What exactly is possible? You can create interactive digital content using Intuiface and run that content embedded within the framework exposed by any third-party content management system. Well, I said any. In theory, any. We'll talk about that. It just works. You don't have to do anything. The CMS vendors don't have to do anything. It just works. We have to validate. So I'm not saying like we're just going to throw a dart at a wall, hit a CMS, and say we support it. It needs to be validated. We're talking about 90-10. It's usually the 80-20 rule. We're talking 90-10. 90% it just works. 10, well, maybe there needs to be a tweak because the way the CMS framework works, it could happen. There are some platforms, I won't differentiate which are which. Some have been 100%. It just worked. We did nothing. For others, had a tweak. A little bit. So we always need to validate. But in theory, every time we go into a new CMS for validation, we're expecting it to work. Okay? So deeply interactive digital content can be embedded alongside your traditional broadcast digital signage. As the graphic shows, you could have, traditional stuff right alongside interactive stuff. Could be full screen, could be in a zone, that's all up to you. It's just another piece of media. It happens to be fully interactive. How does it work? So big picture, how does it work? In Intuiface, and I'm going to show you this in a moment, you create experiences in something called Composer. And when you've built something in Composer, you publish it to a storage environment we call Intuiface Cloud. Okay? From Intuiface Cloud, you can push it to players running on Windows devices, BrightSign devices, Samsung Tizen devices. You can also publish it to the web. I'll show you all this in a moment. There'll be a demo. You build an experience in Composer, and you publish it to the web, which generates a URL. You put the URL in a browser, up opens the experience, okay? Forget the CMSs. You put the URL in a browser, the experience is running in a browser. You create in your CMS of choice the web object, the web page asset, the web page widget, whatever you call it, in your CMS of choice, and you assign it the URL. You give it the URL of the experience. Because at the end of the day, you're just acting like a container, a web container running our stuff, right? So you place that object. So again, all CMSs can vary about how you do this, but conceptually, you put that object, asset, widget, whatever, inside a playlist. You assign the playlist to a set of screens. Ideally, there's a refresh duration that's a long time. You don't need to refresh the Intuiface thing. Doesn't need to have an interval. It's just going to run, I guess, forever, but however you can configure it. And then you publish to the network. And there you go. And now it's alongside your existing stuff. Right? I'm going to do a demo. I don't need glasses. I do this just for effect. By the way, I'm going to pause here for anybody that just joined. See that questions panel? We're monitoring the questions panel. Type in your questions. We'll answer the questions. Okay. My colleague Seb is watching those. I don't see a lot of action there yet, but don't be shy. So, demonstration. Let me start by looking at Composer. I have to assume that some of you just don't know us at all, which is really, shame on you, but okay, mistakes have been made. This is Composer. This is the tool one uses to create interactive digital experiences. It is a no-code platform that takes your media, images, videos, documents, 3D models, websites, audio files, and more, and you can organize them however you wish. You control every single pixel of the design. You control the layout, the storyboard. There's no zones in Intuiface. There's no pre-built templates you have to conform to in Intuiface. You control everything. And what you see here is, in fact, the experience we use to tell our story. So we don't use PowerPoint when we tell our own story. We use Intuiface, and this experience has been published to the web. Now, in Composer, let me just show you. So if I push play, I want to maximize the opportunity for things to go wrong during a webinar. So I'm going to play this experience in Composer, just so you get a sense for what it looks like. So there's some sort of splash screen with a video. And if I'm using my mouse, I can also use my finger. I got a touch screen down here, headless CMS, learn more. And then there's some sort of asset flow here. And there's a drop down in the upper left. Use my left hand, it's better. And you can see, for example, some pop-ups here, and I can manipulate. So this experience is currently running inside the editor, inside Composer. This is where we built it. And then in the upper left-hand corner, File, Publish. So that means publish to Intuiface Cloud, to get it up in the cloud. Because I want to now push it to devices. So let's go up, up, up into the cloud. And here we are in the Intuiface Share and Deploy console. And you can see I have a set of experiences published by the Intuiface account in which I was working. And this item right here is that experience, the Intuiface overview experience we just saw inside Composer. Here it is. A lot of stuff we can talk about, that this is not the venue for it. See Deploy as web page? You see that tab over there? Deploy as web page. I'm going to use what's called player licensing, a little out of scope for this discussion. It's the type of licensing you want to use. And I'll talk about licensing a little bit, actually. But so that's the type of licensing you want to use when embedding in a CMS. So that's the one. And I can create a URL. You see that? There's no URLs yet, but I can create a URL. Let me create a URL. Now, it already exists. It's already published. It has this URL with this awful slug. But I could leave it, but I won't. So I'll say, Jeff is great host. Okay, and I'm going to permit use in an iframe. I'm going to demonstrate how to embed Intuiface experiences inside Samsung VXT. And in Samsung VXT, we need this setting to permit use in an iframe. All right, save. Ignore the other settings. We can get to that another time. So I've created a URL. You can see it down here. And that URL is running the experience. But so let's do this. Let me go to VXT. And by the way, why VXT? Because I don't want to have to pick a favorite. VXT is new. It's still in beta. Nobody's going to feel offended, I think, if I use VXT instead of some of you bigger, more mainstream CMSs. So that's why we're using VXT. And right now I have one piece of content with this image, and this tab in my browser is a virtual screen. This is a way you can test your work in Samsung VXT, is use virtual screens. And I'm using a virtual screen to run this piece of content, this image, and it's working. Okay. Let me copy the URL. Copy. And in Samsung VXT, I'm going to add content. Now, there's more than one way to do this in VXT, like a lot of your preferred CMSs is typically more than one way to skin a cat. Here, we're going to do one way, which is enter a URL. So here's the URL to the experience we just published. I'll call this Intuiface overview. There is a refresh interval, which I'll maximize. For this webinar, it doesn't matter, but you understand why. Done. So this is creating a new piece of content. It is a reference to the URL for our experience, and we are done. That is actually it. So here we have the screen running this very well-known, gorgeous Van Gogh painting, Van Gogh, for your Europeans out. And in Samsung VXT, you'll see this little symbol. See what I'm circling with my mouse? That means that's the media running on a screen somewhere. Not necessarily this screen, but it's running on a screen somewhere. I'm going to take this Intuiface overview and set it to that screen. I'm going to assign it to that screen. I'm going to replace it. So it's publishing. And what was happening now is all of the media, the entire experience is being downloaded preemptively. So this can run offline. That's what's happening right now. And take a look. So we are now in Samsung VXT. We're in that player, that virtual screen. I have deployed the Intuiface experience to that screen, and it is the exact same thing we saw inside Intuiface. So remember, this is now in my browser. It's not standalone in Intuiface's standalone player. This is a web page running inside Samsung VXT. Let me go to Composer. And remember, now I'm using my touchscreen to manipulate content in the experience running inside my screen, my digital signage screen. We are full screen here, of course. We're taking up all of the screen real estate, but this could be in one particular zone and sized appropriately, where you have non-interactive stuff in some parts and interactive stuff in others, and it just works. How pretty is that? I'll wait for some of you to stand up. I'm sure you fell off your chair. Now, Seb, this is where I promised to pause and to see if there are any questions that should urgently be asked. So before I continue further, let me know if there's any question you think we should address.
I tried to answer all the questions directly in the chat. And hello, everybody, by the way. There is one which is interesting is, when deploying an experience as a web page, can I use my existing player licenses, my available player licenses?
Yes, yes, you can. Now, we will talk about licensing a little bit later, but the way we're licensing Intuiface experiences running in a third-party CMS is to use the exact same license model we use for traditional on-device, in-venue, local execution in players. The exact same license, yes. Correct. And again, I'll do a little more discussion about licenses when we. Thank you for the question. I'm sure everybody has stood up now after fainting. So let's talk about which Intuiface features. There are going to be some limitations. For example, out of the box, remember, websites are essentially walled gardens. They are designed to prevent malicious things from happening. And so to poke through it to peripherals, for example, or to devices identifying gestures into sensors becomes more complicated because you're inside the web walled garden. So by default, what you're getting in terms of human interaction is going to be mainly touch. There are ways to break through the walled garden to accommodate different means for interactivity. Let's call that a V2 kind of thing. Right now, we just want to make sure we can get multi-touch interactive digital stuff working inside your CMS. But there are other things we can do as well. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see there's the runtime. That's player running in the web, right? And it's Windows and it's Android, Mac OS, it's Linux. We validated on a variety of platforms. If it's in the browser, forget the CMS, if it's in a browser on those platforms, it should work. Our main requirement, and I'm going to show this on the screen later, but I'm going to say it now, Chromium 83 or later. Chromium 83 or later. Chromium 83 or later. Some CMSs are still using an older version of Chromium. It won't work. Okay, there's going to be issues. Chromium version 83 was August 2020. April 2020, it's almost 3 years ago. So we're not asking you to do something super recent, but we do need that. If you're in a browser running that version of Chromium or later on one of those platforms, obviously Chrome would be the ideal candidate. It's going to work. What else can you get from Intuiface in your CMS? Almost everything you can do in the editor will run on the web. We do have a list of limitations, like we have drawing tools. Well, okay, those don't work yet. And we document online what those limitations are. But by and large, if you can do it in Composer, it'll run in the CMS. Data integration, the ability of Intuiface to dynamically communicate with the cloud, to retrieve content, to push content to the cloud, to talk to any web API, is everything we can do will work outside of these, inside the CMS, as long as there's a network connection. I think that's pretty obvious. One of the beauties of Intuiface is its ability to facilitate these conversations with the cloud, to retrieve things dynamically, to react to the environment dynamically, and to update content in context. All of this remains possible inside your CMS. It's a beautiful thing. Content management. We have our own CMS. It is not like your CMS, but its job is to manage content. We call it headless because it is divorced from the user interface. The CMSs you're typically used to, the content is intimately associated with the zones. This content, this playlist is in this zone, this content, this playlist is in this zone. Our CMS has no idea what the UI looks like. It doesn't know about zones or assets or nothing. All you do in our headless CMS is manage the content. You define the data structures, you assign content to the data structures, and it's the job of the experiences to pull from the CMS. The CMS itself is completely ignorant of the UI, and the people using our headless CMS could be ignorant of that as well. You don't have to use it. You can actually use any web accessible data resource as a CMS. We've had customers doing that for years. You can certainly do it, but our CMS does have some advantages of particular note. What is actually happening from the experiences perspective is it's communicating with a copy of the base on the device. So in fact, the experience is not communicating with the cloud-hosted master. It's not. It's communicating with a locally synchronized copy of that base that's on the device, which is why we can go offline. That synchronization allows the device to be completely offline, and we can still filter and interact with that local base in real time. So there are some advantages, and we can talk about that further if you'd like. One last feature to highlight that remains accessible to you and embedded inside your favorite CMS is analytics. We've been offering analytics forever because the beauty of interactivity is you have context, you have events, you have data to collect. If I have a camera and I have a touch screen and I have a connection to the network, I know a 30-year-old female on a sunny day on a Tuesday on the second floor of this store touched this item on this screen. I know all of that. We've been enabling our customers to collect data for 8 years and have been enabling them to visualize it in our own chart creation and dashboard publishing feature for 5. And all of that remains available. You can export the data. It's not stuck in there. You can see forward data up in the chart there in the upper right. You can export that data. Most of our customers, they have nothing to export it to. Never done analytics before. And so they're using our analytics capability to gain just deep insight into how their audiences are using it, what is getting the most and least attention, everything from dwell time to most popular product to contextual variation based on weather, sports scores, gender. All of that is possible, and all of that can be done with Intuiface, even when it's embedded in your CMS. All right, so we did have a license question. If you are an Intuiface customer and you have player licenses, it's the same license. It's that per device license. One device at a time. You can move it. One device at a time, but you can always move it. In theory, you don't need as many licenses as you have screens. You only need as many licenses as you'll have screens running at the same time. You get my point. So they are interchangeable with those individual. It's the same license, same cost, same everything. You get the same volume discount advantage if you are entitled to that. It's the same stuff. I have been mentioning on more than one occasion the ability of our experience running in your CMS to run offline. This is both independent of the CMS or inside the CMS, either way. This is a reflection of what we call the retention period. How long is a license retained? The data's there anyway. All the media is there anyway. The license can be retained for a preset duration, minimum 20 minutes, maximum 30 days, and it's a slider. You can go anywhere in between, where it will say, I'm offline, but my license is good until next Friday, so whatever, I'll keep running. So it will support that offline use up to 30 days. And then the license, whatever your retention duration is, the license is released. It automatically is released back into the pool. Even if you're not online, what will happen is if you're offline and the retention duration expires, the license is returned. The experience running on the device won't run anymore. It'll say expired license if it's offline. So, be aware. How are we maximizing performance? Because this is a different paradigm. This is publishing to the web. This is not an experience running locally on a device. This is a website in a way. Could be on multiple devices in very different geographic locations. How do we maximize performance? Well, here's what we did. Oh, time is perfect. We did a couple things with Amazon. So first of all, that Intuiface Cloud that I mentioned, remember in Composer, you publish your experience to Intuiface Cloud? That's AWS. So it's not a server in our office, it's AWS. And we're taking advantage of 12 locations. So what we do is when you publish an experience, we pick the AWS bucket location that is closest to where you are geographically to try to minimize literally the distance between where it's stored by Amazon and where you are located. So there are 12 locations worldwide. And then when we publish, we take advantage of AWS's content delivery network. Think of it as a sub-region cache. When I download the experience, if the experience was published by an account in Singapore, and then I publish that experience to the web, and I open that URL in my browser in New York, what will happen is the CDN in New York is going to cache all of the stuff that's coming from Singapore. So the very first time I put in the URL, it could take a little while because you're waiting for all the stuff to come over. Remember, it's designed to run offline. So all that stuff is coming down up front. Once it comes down and it's cached on that CDN, then anybody entering that URL in that sub-region using that CDN will get it much faster because it's already cached on the CDN. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And then, as I said, all the media are downloaded with the first launch. So because it is designed to run offline, we proactively download everything, which means the first time you run it on a specific device, well, it'll take as long as your network connection requires it to take. If you have 50 multi-gigabyte videos, that's a bad design, but I guess you could do it. It's going to take a little while because it's got to download them. Once it's done, then subsequent runs will be quick because it's already on your device. It's already cached. Okay? Make sense? Hope it makes sense. Some other features of note, just to point out things you can take advantage of when embedded in your CMS. Here's a really important one, actually, which is keyboards. We have a virtual keyboard supporting over 30 languages, so you can even have forms and means of people entering information on the screen with the keyboards. It will just show up in the zone you create for hosting our experience. We have this really cool feature where you can pass in values using a URL parameter. Whether you're using it in a CMS or not, the running experience can see parameters appended to the slug. And so you can come up with some really cool scenarios where the parameters can vary from screen to screen, and thus the experiences are being told to do things a little differently or show things a little different. It's kind of cool. So it's a way to pass in information through the CMS or however you're entering the URL. There is device awareness. The experience has device information accessible to it. It's where it is located geographically. We call this system information, maybe even like IP address. And this awareness can, again, enable you to be a little smart about what you show. To say, well, if I'm in this region, then X. If I'm in that region, then Y. Well, how do you know what region you're in? Well, the system information interface asset can collect that information on the fly dynamically, and you can react to it. So that's pretty cool. And finally, all this work we've done does inherit our ISO 27001 certification. We've actually just renewed it. So I don't know how much you guys know about 27001. Hard to get. And what happens is you need a major audit every 3 years and a minor audit in between. So we've had it for 3 years. We just had our second major audit and we're confirmed again. So now we're good for another 3 years with some minor audits in between. The beauty of this is, just like if we use AWS, we inherit Amazon's certification. When you use Intuiface, you inherit ours. This sort of guarantee about information security management, that it remains confidential, accessible, and always available. This is a promise we can make. The beauty of the certification is, instead of filling out a 30-page IT, RFP, RFI, we just give them a certificate. And so that's pretty cool. So users inherit the benefit of our certification. So why would I need this? I suspect a lot of you are here because you already have a sense for why you need this, but let's be inspired. If you're an integrator, and in a way, this was our main use case as Intuiface, is we had many integrator customers saying, look, I've got customers with entrenched CMSs that want to do interactivity. I don't want to have to rip and replace. Can they coexist? And yes, as we've now established, they can coexist. You don't have to rip and replace. You can actually combine, because we're friends, not enemies. If you're an end user, if you are the boss of your CMS, you're not working through an integrator, great. You get the same benefit. You can even explore things you maybe never even thought were possible. These are new scenarios, new use cases made possible by being able to host Intuiface experiences, to introduce rich interactive apps, and now you have that ability. For the vendors yourself, those of you that have joined us, for many of you, there's simple, kind of single touch interaction, kind of simple sensor triggered interaction, but anything beyond that was maybe a lot of custom dev, or sorry, we can't do it. Now you have another option, which is, well, there is Intuiface, and you can build it with them and just run it in our framework. So it is a nice alternative to, please spend a lot more money so we can get it to work in our framework. And I'll do a whole webinar about why we are not a lot of money. I'll schedule that next. Which platforms are we currently validated on? Remember, we always validate. We don't just assume, we always validate. So what you see on the screen is what we call our tech ecosystem. We do lots of validation. If it's not here, it doesn't mean it doesn't work. These are validated platforms. We tested it, a customer tested it, so we know it's going to work. There could be other items here. We added a new section for digital signage platforms. And in that section were the first 5 validated platforms, AppSpace, and if any of you are with us today, thank you for joining. BrightSign, if any of you are with us, thank you for joining. Korbyt, I'd rather you guys were not here. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for joining. Navori, thank you so much if you're here with us. And Samsung VXT, I'm sure lots of people from Samsung are on this call. I'm sure they had nothing else to do. These were the first 5 validated platforms, and we document online how to do it, but it should be obvious. All you need is the URL. So however you stuck a URL in your favorite CMS, that's how it's going to work, but we do document online how it's done. So these are the first 5 validated platforms. We, of course, are on a mission to validate as many as we can. And so here's what's coming in the pipeline. We are announcing DICE support today and Signage Live coming soon. DICE is today. So we are adding it to our tech ecosystem and have its own landing page and all that sort of thing. So all of you fans of DICE, congratulations. And Signage Live, another big signage player, We are working with them currently to validate, and hopefully that will be done soon. So that is next on the roadmap. If you want us to support your favorite CMS, let us know. Let us know. By the way, you can test it yourself. So let's talk about that. How can you try it? Because you can test it yourself. Here's what you do. If you don't have an Intuiface account, create one. Okay? And on a private email, give me your credit card number and I will take care of all the charging. Don't do that. When you've created your account, you have an account, contact your rep and ask them for access to Player NextGen. So let's be clear, Player NextGen isn't actually shipping globally yet. It's not. It's super beta. I mean, we're very close to general availability, but technically, officially, it's not fully GA yet. That's why you're asking a rep. You can't just grab it. I don't think we say no anymore. If we say no to you, you've got big problems. Chances are. So you need to ask for it. You're going to get it. Access to Player NextGen. And when you have access to Player NextGen, then you have the ability to do things like publish to the web. Request access, create an experience, deploy it to the web. I showed you how to do it. It's not hard. Clicking a button. Try it in your favorite CMS. Remember, Chromium Web Engine greater than or equal to version 83. There are CMSs out there that we've taken a look at. It's less than version 83. It's not going to work. That's a 3-year-old engine. I understand CMSs, like any software, it takes a long time. I'm not saying, I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm just saying, I don't think what we're asking for is terrible, but just make sure if we haven't mentioned your CMS, if we haven't validated yet or in the process of validating it, and you want to try it, this is the main determinant of success or failure, is the version of the web engine. So you want to make sure it's version 83 or later. Try it out and let us know how it goes. Maybe it works. It just works. Again, I'm not going to mention which or which. Some of the validated platforms, we did nothing. It just worked. For some of them, 90-10, a little bit of tweak here or there. Okay? That's it. That's everything. So I just want to cover a couple items that we're going to do a big Q&A. Seb, grab a drink of water. We'll jump on those. Since I have your attention, just a couple things I want you to be aware of. Tomorrow, Seb and I, Seb, the guy answering the questions, are hosting our quarterly Q&A live session every 3 months. We take the best questions we got over the past 3 months, and we answer them live with demos. And everybody is welcome to join us for that. It is free. It's just like this. And next week, our COO, Vincent Oncont, will be in Munich for DSSC, Digital Signage Summit Europe. That's July 5th and 6th. Vincent's in a bunch of sessions. He'll also be available. So if any of you are in the Munich area, in the Europe area, and would like to get a face-to-face with our COO, that's where you can catch him. And he doesn't run fast. It's easy to catch him. All right, Seb, that's a lot of content. Hopefully, I've helped everyone understand what is possible, the promise, how cool this actually is, that you can now incorporate interactivity into your current entrenched digital signage CMS. Seb, do we have any questions we should highlight or ask or anything like that?
So it's not water that I need, it's 2 or 3 keyboards to type at the same time. We got a lot of questions. Actually, I'm trying to answer almost most all of them. Yes, the webinar recording will be published on our events webpage. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're posting this on intuiface.com/events. I guess
it'll be on events. It's also going to be on our webinars page. It's also, and we're going to send out an email to everybody who registered.
So yes, it will be posted here. We had a few questions about, is the content downloaded locally? Yes, no. And so we have developed, Intuiface has developed its own cache policy. So as soon, we are trying to download as much of the content as we can when using this player licensing mode in Player NextGen. And then it will, which part of the device is being used will depend on the platform, like BrightSign, Samsung Tizen, etc., and how much we have access to the file system. But generally speaking, in most cases, yes, we are downloading all the content from the experiences first thing, so that this initial download is a bit longer, but then the experience can run offline and as fluidly as possible, getting all the content locally.
I know I've said that like 3 times, so hopefully those questions came before I said it. Yeah, it's that's what this whole slide was about, essentially.
Quick one. Do we have any representatives in Spain? No, but Toulouse is pretty close to Spain, and that's where our headquarters are. So you can contact sales@intuiface.com, and somebody from France will reach out to you, Walter.
For those new to us, we are headquartered in France. Seb and I are in the States. We've got some good global coverage, but Toulouse is there.
What is pricing going to be like for NextGen? Is it similar to current gen pricing?
Yes. Next question. It's identical. Strategically, do you plan to work with programmatic buying services? So there's the question about DOOH, programmatic advertising, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly very aware. At this moment, it would be working side by side, not embedding. So there are certain signage platforms that made a commitment to host programmatic advertising to enable ads to be served up to various zones on the screen, and we can coexist with that, no problem. Obviously, that would be a non-issue. Embedded within Intuiface itself, if that's what you're asking, not yet. Conceptually, it's just a matter of execution, and there's other stuff on the list that we'd like to do first. But to coexist side by side, should be a non-issue.
Which brings me to a previous question we had from Marco. Can you jump out of the Interface app back into, for example, VXT playlist and vice versa? This will greatly depend on the CMS capabilities and how we, Interface, can communicate with it. But obviously, that's the kind of things that we want to address, the kind of use cases where you have maybe an ad-based, a DOOH programmatic ad loop going through the regular CMS, whether it's VXT, Navori, whatever, a CMS. And when you touch that screen, you want to jump into Interface. So can the CMS handle that? On our end, on the Interface side, when the interactive experience is done, we can raise a trigger or send some kind of message to the CMS, hey, take the lead back. You can go back to your playlist and display your regular content through an inactivity timer, or because the user just reached the end of the interactive experience. This will be probably CMS dependent because we need to build that communication with each of them.
But talk to us.
Yes.
We can help you. So a question is being asked, what happens if I run out of licenses and somebody tries to load the experience? It's going to say essentially no licenses available. We got some message. It says basically, I mean, it's really no different. And in a way, I'm going to exaggerate to make a point. What we're doing embedded in the CMS is identical to what we do on a kiosk. You could think of it as a kiosk, as a standalone screen whose job is to broadcast information to an audience. So just like with traditional player, if you run out of licenses, you run out of licenses. And the player will not be happy, and it will say, I don't have a license. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to say, I don't have a license. Maybe one day we can white label those things, but today you can't white label it. So it's just, no license. Seb, it sounds like you're running out of steam for existing questions, so I will encourage others that are we still got quite a few people with us if there's other questions that people have. I'm sure Seb kicked butt when he was typing.
That was a good one I wanted to mention. I think that was from Justin. Yeah, this one. Will existing experiences be usable in Player NextGen, or do they need to be built from scratch for Player NextGen? And that's an excellent question. If your old, current, existing experiences that you built in Composer are using features which are available in NextGen, then you have nothing to do. You just go on your share and deploy, and you will see a new tab which you didn't see a few months ago, deploy to the web. Click the blue button, create URL, and you have a URL, and you have your experience published on the web. We do have an article listing the current limitations of Player NextGen compared to the regular player for Windows you may have been using, or the regular player for Android, BrightSign, whatever platform you've been using in the past. So if you're not using one of these features in the limitations, then you're good to go. If you are, you may have to change a few things or wait just a few weeks. So we are reaching that GA phase for the Play NextGen.
The feature parity. Seb is right. I mean, we tried very hard. I mean, we wouldn't be having this webinar if there were still tons to go. As I said, we're very close to GA, a little bit of work to be done, a couple features not yet available. Typically, you're probably okay, but you should check the limitations article. But you certainly don't need to rebuild from scratch. I mean, that would be horrible. So no, you don't have to. Let's see, if multiple people are using the URL at once, does it count as one license? Each screen is a license. Each screen is a license. 5 people, 5 screens, 5 licenses. You can't look. The licensing used for embedding in a CMS should only be used when you have a predetermined, understood number of screens. You know how many screens are in that network, so you can have the right number of licenses for it. If you have a variable, indeterminate number of screens, then this is going to be a tough deployment. There is an alternative licensing model we offer, views licensing, which wouldn't work very well with CMSs because it doesn't support, for example, this on-device caching. It exists when you don't know how many screens, you don't know how many number of people. It needs to be super scalable. If you're working with a known signage network, you know how many screens there are, you know how many licenses you're going to need, okay? And that's the way this licensing paradigm works with the CMSs. There's a question here about player licensing versus Intuiface licensing, big picture. In order to build an experience, in order to manage content in the headless CMS, in order to collect data using Intuiface analytics, that's what we call a platform subscription, which is independent of the number of player licenses you have. Whether you have 2 player licenses or 1,000, you need one platform subscription. That platform subscription entitles you to build experiences, manage the content, collect and analyze the data. That's what the platform subscription is about. Independent of that are the player licenses. And you need as many of those as you have screens for your CMS. Scott, I need about 5 minutes to understand your question.
I got it.
Got it? All right, good. Go ahead.
I think I got it. So location-based signage delivery. So dynamic local content for location-based signage delivery. An example would definitely help to understand the question. But long story short, with our players, you can put tags on the players, and depending on where the data is coming from, you mentioned dynamic local content. So I would assume some local APIs, maybe. Taking a silly example, local weather. You have one experience in 3 cities. You want the example, local real estate listings. Yeah, perfect. So you have some ID. And that's why typically, Jeff, can you go back to your previous slide where you have the URL parameter? Yes, dynamic parameters. So if you have your web.interface.com/myrealestateexperience ? Location ID equals Denver. Then you can use this parameter within the experience to change maybe a query parameter to your real estate API and to get only the content that you want to have in this particular location. So whether you use Interface on its own, where you can set these parameters, or you can use the player tags, or you use Interface within a CMS as the purpose of this webinar today, you can add these parameters to the URL and then reuse these parameters within the experience to change the content based on these parameter values. I hope that makes sense. And that answers your questions.
Thank you. I hope so too. There was an earlier question. Let me clarify. You got it. Good. License retention. If I close forget the embedding CMS. If I run an experience with this licensing and I close it, what happens to the license? Well, that still comes down to your retention parameter, the retention period. If the retention period is 30 days, it's still going to be retained on that device. What you could do is delete the URL in the share and deploy console, the thing I showed you on the web. And if you delete the URL, that will force a release of the license. But you need to be smart about your retention period. Closing the browser does not override the retention period. It's still going to be retained. I think we're caught up.
I think we caught up with all the questions so far.
We don't turn into pumpkins for 5 more minutes, so we can. If there's more questions, we can stick around. Obviously, if you guys have to go, or if you feel perfectly satisfied, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we will be sharing the recording. Everybody who registered, even those who didn't come, will be getting an email with the video link to it. Another question. Ooh, 2 questions. Okay, that's not a
I'll
question.
text Scott. I will let you text Jorge.
Jorge said, any plans for a web-based Intuiface editor? Yes, there are plans, and in a year or 2, maybe we'll have it. The question is Composer in the browser. That was the question ultimately. We've got Player in a browser. We got Experiences in a browser. What about Composer in a browser? Yeah, we've been thinking about it forever, and it is a huge job that we will absolutely undertake. Absolutely undertake at some point. It's going to take a while. So do not wait for it, but it's definitely something on our roadmap. Again, we have exhausted the pipeline. Anybody else? Still a bunch of people sticking around? Anybody too shy to ask?
You're welcome, Jorge. Thanks for asking the questions.
Take off these glasses I don't need.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming. We're thrilled to finally have this webinar to share the news with you. Been working on it for quite a while. Player NextGen we've been tinkering with it since before COVID. And we're finally able to bring it to you guys and do some really cool stuff like this. So we're really thrilled to be able to bring it to you, and we're really excited to hear what you think. So we hope you get your hands on it and try it out. I think we'll call it, Seb. What do you think? So remember, if you want to try it, let me get back to that slide. If you want to try it, just create an account, talk to your rep, or just email sales at. We can give you access. We're not going to say no. Well, as long as you're nice. And you can try it out, and please give us feedback. We're very excited to hear how it goes. Seb, thank you very much. I'm looking at the mic. Seb, thank you for helping out, always.
Welcome. Thank you, guys, for asking so many questions and keeping me busy today.
2 keyboards. Thanks, everyone, for coming, folks. We'll send you the recording. Take care. Have a good day.